Hi everybody, this is a vlog in response to the Q&A that I put up last week. Got some really great questions. It's not really going to be a sort of factual stats based vlog, it's more going to be based on opinions. I'm going to try and run through all the questions and answer all the questions that I've got. So if I'm looking down, it's because I'm looking at all the questions here. So, without further ado, I'll start with Mandy, who asks, what was Henry's respective age when he was marrying each wife? This is a great question because I think it highlights one great thing. So the ages, I think, were 17 when he married Catherine of Aragon. He was just about to turn 18. He was 41 when he married Anne Boleyn. 45, Jane Seymour, 49, Anne of Cleves and Catherine Howard, and 52, Catherine Parr. What's so interesting about this is the difference between Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn, 17 to 41, and I think this shows almost better than anything just how long he was married to Catherine for and what a huge impact she had on his life. They were married for much longer than any other of his wife. So that's a great question. Thanks, Mandy, and one that highlights a really interesting part of Henry's life. Moving on to Lisa, who asks a few questions. She says, how did you get interested in Tudor history? That's a question that Julie asks as well. That's a really easy one. Quite a few years ago now, I watched the BBC adaptation of the Tudors and just loved it. It was such a great drama. Loved all the series. And whilst I knew that was, written for drama and not necessarily completely factually accurate, I also knew that there was clearly a huge degree of truth to it, and it was a period of history that was clearly really fascinating. So I think on the back of that, I bought a Tudor book just to read, and then my friends and family realised that I was quite into it. So the next Christmas and birthday that came along, I received loads of books, which I then went on to read, and it kind of went from there, really. Lisa also asks, favourite Tudor book author. Again, this is quite an easy one, so one that I reference quite a lot in my posts. Alison Weir, love her stuff, love all the new stuff that she uncovers, love the way she writes. So whilst there are a lot of great Tudor related authors out there, Alison is probably my favourite. She also asks, who do you think killed the princes in the tower and why? It's not an area that I'm particularly clued up on. I don't see any reason to disbelieve what the sort of general consensus is about Richard III. And I think the reason why will be sort of self-preservation, in terms of they were clearly a threat to his crown in terms of their claim to the throne. So that'll be why he disposed of them. But it is a really fascinating one. It's almost like some more modern day JFK. There's an explanation of what happened, but there seems to be something that doesn't quite ring true to it. And there's always been a fascination there with the princes in the tower. Maybe something will come to light later on in history that will clear things up once and for all. Probably not, but you never know. She also says, Lisa, do you think Anne Boleyn was as ambitious and Jane Seymour as innocent as Tudor authors usually portray them to be, or were they pawns of ambitious families? I think Anne Boleyn was religious, but I think Lisa makes a great point there. She clearly had a very ambitious family behind her, and that's portrayed quite a lot in the Tudors, the BBC adaptation. And I recently watched The Other Boleyn Girl, which is obviously full of historical inaccuracies, but again, that portrays them as very ambitious, and I think they were as a family. Jane, I think the fact that Henry took to her so well suggests that she was fairly submissive and innocent, but at the same time, she will have been well aware of what was going on with Anne Boleyn in Anne Boleyn's final days, and she went ahead and married Henry. So I don't think she was completely innocent. I certainly don't think she was without brains. So yeah. So there we go with Jane. Probably was fairly innocent, especially in comparison to Anne, but I think she was probably quite a steely character as well. Julie asks, are there any other eras of history that really interest me? There are. I love history full stop, but I think because I found such a niche in the Tudors that I loved so much, it's almost like if I have an opportunity to read a history book, I'm going to read the Tudors because it's something I'm so interested in and I want to sort of expand my knowledge on that. So everything else has kind of been put on the back burner. But I love reading about the history of World War One and Two. I think that's obviously a horrific period in history, but something that's fascinating, and also sort of more social history. I'm a huge fan of the 1960s. Socially, I'm a massive Beatles fan. I also love Frank Sinatra, the Rat Pack, and all that kind of era, and had a real interest in JFK and the sort of American politics at the time. So anything 1960s wise really gets my interest. Julie also says, what are your opinions of Thomas Cromwell, baddie or not? For some reason, I really like Cromwell. Not necessarily like him as a person or how he's portrayed, but he's a Tudor character that I find really interesting. I read a book on him a year or so back, and I can't remember who it was by at the moment, but I'll try and remember and put it in another blog. But it fascinated me. I think whatever your thoughts are on Cromwell, like his predecessor Cardinal Wolsey, he rose from nothing to become Henry's real right hand man, and I think for that you've got to at the very least sort of respect him for that. Ray says, I hope I've pronounced that right, Ray. Let me know if not. I wish Henry could have seen Elizabeth's reign. Did Henry have much interaction with his children? I think his interaction with his children was very sporadic, sort of dependent on whether they were towing the party line. You know, he went years without seeing Mary, especially during the Great Matter and when she was aligning herself to her mother, Catherine. He went long periods of not seeing Elizabeth. She obviously reminded him of his second wife, Anne Boleyn, which he didn't really want reminding of, and even Edward, who was the son and heir he'd always craved, whilst he was obviously extremely interested about his progression and how he was going on. He wasn't really a hands-on father. He certainly wouldn't be getting any prizes for Dad of the Year. The only caveat I'd say with that is clearly this was at a time and he was of a position as king where it wasn't expected that he would have that hands-on role. But no, certainly he didn't have the interaction with his children that they probably would have liked or needed. Lauren says, I'm interested in anything related to Tudor gowns, jewels and personal effects. I'm in the process of drawing different Tudor pieces from the queens of the period, so more information the better. Not an area that I know a great deal about, but having said that, I did a post, I think it was last week, with the Boleyn Cup, which is obviously an artefact that comes from the 1530s. So I'm with you on that one in terms of artifacts and things from the time. I find that really fascinating because, one, it's almost a sort of first-hand account because, you know, they are the items that were there at the time, and also there's something that I just find really fascinating of knowing that, you know, you're looking at the exact things, same things that those eyes from the people of the Tudor age would have set eyes on as well. So there's something about that I do find really interesting with. So I'm with you on that one. Tracy says, can you please share information on Henry's trip with Anne to Calais to meet the French king? I've done a bit of digging on this, so I know that they set sail on the 11th of October 1532. Henry met with Francis on the 21st of October, and Anne met Francis on the 27th of October, and this is quite famously documented piece of Tudor history because Anne made a dramatic entrance at a banquet held for Francis by Henry in Francis's honour. She came disguised in a masquerade ball and danced with Francis before dramatically revealing herself. The likelihood is that Francis knew it was her all along, but still there was great drama there, and she then had a one-to-one conversation with Anne. I don't think anybody truly knows what that conversation was about, but Francis also gave her a diamond as a gift. So the reason why that will have happened is that it was all political. It was all when Anne's reputation was very shaky. Catherine of Aragon was still very much fighting for her husband, and Henry wanted acceptance from the French king, which would obviously strengthen his position. I'm not sure he ever got true acceptance from Francis, but clearly he was amiable with Anne. So to that extent, the trip to Calais that Henry brought Anne on with was a success. Next question comes from Simon, who says, I'd love to know your views on Mary. I'm a bit of a Mary sympathiser. I don't think I've made any secret of that. Again, there's a poll a few weeks ago that I ran on Mary, and whilst clearly there was things that she did during her reign as queen that wasn't great, hence her title of Bloody Mary. I think it's harsh to label her just on those few years as queen. She had an extremely difficult upbringing. A lot of things happened in her life that led her to make the decisions that she did. She was devoutly Catholic and honourable of her mother's memory, and there were a lot of reasons why she didn't have a particularly successful reign as queen, and I think those need to be taken into account. So I think Mary probably gets a little bit of a hard press in modern day history, but that's just my view. Fiona asks, if Henry was king today, what political changes would he make? This is an interesting one because I think, and again, it's all personal opinion. To me, Henry was almost the first Brexiteer. So obviously, in the UK, we're going through Brexit at the moment, and I think you can make a lot of sort of synergy between the UK voting to leave the EU and regain control is the slogan that's often used, and regain sort of sovereign rights. And really, this is what Henry was trying to establish with his break from Rome. Although he was the King of England, he was kind of subordinate to the Pope, and what he did was break with Rome to ensure that he was, king 100% uncontested and head of the church. So I think if he was here today, he'd support Brexit. He would want full sovereignty for England, the United Kingdom. I'm not sure he'd particularly agree with the democratic process. I think he'd probably want more autonomy over it. But there's, although it was over 500 years ago, there is definite synergy with things politically that happen to this day that you might associate with Henry. And the final question for now, Emily asked, do you think Margaret Beaufort would have been proud of the actions of the Tudors, considering her devout faith and the struggles she faced to put Henry Tudor on the throne in the first place? That's a great question, and I think I'm quite comfortable with my answer. I think she would have been proud. She was a devout Catholic, but you have to remember as well that Henry actually was very idiosyncratic with his religion. I mean, his issue really was with the Pope. He never truly turned his back on Catholicism, and that's shown by the fact that Edward, his son, who succeeded him briefly, was intent on bringing full-blown Protestantism into the country, which is something that Henry hadn't actually done. So in that respect, he never truly moved away from Margaret's devout beliefs. And also, I think, in terms of his actions, the way he treated his wives, the way he went about things, Margaret was clearly very loyal to the House of Tudor. She was very ambitious for the House of Tudor. She was ambitious for her son, Henry VII. And she will have perfectly understood that Henry VIII needed a male heir in order to carry on the dynasty. So in that respect, I think she would have, even if she privately didn't agree with the way he went about things, although she might have done, she would have backed him, I think, for the greater good, so to speak. So yeah, that's all the questions for now. Hope you found that interesting. If you'd like me to do another Q&A at some point, do let me know. I'm happy to do another one. But for now, that's all. So thanks very much for your comments, and I'll see you all soon.